Hello and welcome to the first episode of Tea and a Chit Chat. My name is Russell.
I'm Dave.
And we are joined today by the ever impressive James Wallis. Thanks
Hello.
for joining us. First question, obviously this being Tea and a Chit Chat, the most important question is what tea are you drinking today, James?
I am drinking, actually I'm waiting for it to cool down just a little. It's peppermint tea.
Peppermint tea. Now, I remember when you told me that you were going to drink peppermint, there was a kind of like embarrassing, you felt almost like embarrassed or something. What's that about? Like,
It's a bit mainstream. I mean, of the herbal teas, it's kind of mainstream, it's kind of obvious, but at the same time, I really like it. It's very refreshing, it's a very clean taste, it has a great smell.
I think if you're talking mainstream tea, then you can't, get more mainstream than a builder's tea.
It's true, yes.
So
But that's the other thing.
Pretty hip.
Is peppermint tea, is it a proper tea?
Does it make hot water taste different? Yes, then it's a tea.
Done.
Okay.
You could say that about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess the best thing for you to start with, just before we talk about stuff, is if you'd like to introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure, I'm James Wallis. I'm a games designer and consultant, and I do a lot of stuff. I design games, some of which are here. I lecture in games design at London South Bank University, and narrative games that tell stories, which is my big number. That's my passion and what I do a lot of. I run a consultancy called Space with 3 A's, which was very funny when I came up with it 10 years ago, and has grown more and more grating every time I say it.
You're still so committed, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah.
Well,
You don't just say space.
It's my brand, yeah. Space. Well, that's the gimmick. So you get up on a conference stage and you say, I come from space, and everybody remembers you. You're the guy from space. They may think you're a prat, but they will remember you. And it's Space with 3 A's because we're a AAA company. And again,
I was going to ask, and you probably have to explain that quite a lot at some point, don't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do. It also makes sure people spell the URL right.
We obviously are working a board game cafe, and we've got your games and stuff. The first one you created.
What was the first one?
Yes, it was, because this was kind of an accident. We started working on this in 1990. Myself and 2 other designers, Andrew Brilston and Richard Lambert. Neither of whom, sadly, are doing very much in games anymore. But Andrew and I had come out of fanzines. We'd both been editing fanzines while we were at university. He was up in New York, I was down in London. But we knew each other through the scene. And there was, I think it was a New Year's party, Andrew brought along this thing that he and Richard, because they were living in Coventry at the time, had kind of thrown together on the back of small business cards and played it, and it was a laugh. And I went, this is more than a laugh, this has got potential, can I come on the team? And so they let me on, and we spent 2 years refining it. And then I took it to Gen Con in America, and we found a publisher. And the first thing they said was, this is great, but it needs more playtesting. So we playtested it for another year, continually improving it. And then it came out originally in 1993, second edition, which was the first colour edition in 1996. This came out, I can't remember, and there's no copyright date on it.
Do you know what? That just made me think, how TV had a black and white phase and then a colour phase. I didn't think there was such a thing in board games.
It's all to do with budgets. Colour artwork is a lot more expensive to commission than black and white artwork. And no, the first edition is weird. It's an A4 size box, and it's printed on not proper cardstock, and the cards don't have rounded corners because it was all done on a budget. And I think they only printed 2,500.
It's cool that it still did well though.
It did well enough for John Nephew of Atlas Games to have the faith to do another edition with proper artwork. And that did really well. That went into 8 or 9 different languages. And then third edition has kind of exploded. I think this is in 13 languages. Whoa. I'm still waiting for copies of Hebrew and Korean, but I know they exist.
That's awesome.
And it's done 1/3 copies now.
Whoa.
And it's just, that is not what you expect from something that you started mucking around with at a party.
Yeah.
No.
But yeah, it's a storytelling game for those who don't know it. The box does that for no really apparent reason. Because,
I like that. That reminds me of those old games, those video games used to get, or there's definitely or Lego.
Edition,
Lego used to do that.
Yes.
Remember?
But anyway, so that'll tell you, this is the very basic explanation of how to play the game. But you get a handful of cards with fairy tale archetypes and icons in 5 different groups. There's characters, places, events, aspects, which is adjectives, and things. And you start, everyone gets an ending card as well, and you start telling a story. Once upon a time, there was a princess who had been imprisoned in a room at the very top of a tower. I don't have the tower card. I just tower came to mind. You say you've got the tower card, you can interrupt me with the tower card and take over the story at that point. Now leading it round to your ending, because you win by playing your ending card, but you can't do it till you've played all the cards in your hand. But you can also interrupt. There are special interrupt cards as well for the different groups, and that's basically the whole game. And so there's this, and there's a bunch of. I forgot. I grabbed a couple of. There's expansions where you can make your own cards.
Expansion.
This is the latest one, Animal Tales. If you want to put a kind of an Aesop spin on it.
When was that released?
This was last year. There's 6 or 7 expansions now. There's Knightly Tales, which is kind of King Arthur, chivalric. There's Enchanting Tales, which we can't say it's Disney, but it's Disney.
We'll bleep that out.
it's fairies and princesses. Yeah. There's Seafaring Tales, which is buccaneers and pirates and swashbuckling, and a bunch of others.
Is it? And you got more on the pipeline?
Yes.
So cool.
I think we might finally do the Arabian one, and I'm working on a new edition, a different edition of the game called Once Upon a Time in a Galaxy.
I wonder what that's about.
I know, that's the one we can't say it's Star Wars, but it's Star Wars. Because Star Wars is basically a fairy tale. It's fairy tale archetypes the whole way.
Again, as a teacher, I've used Once Upon a Time a lot in the classroom because it's very good at teaching kids how a story is structured. You know, it's like really handy to have as a storytelling device that then they can go off and write those stories down. So it has like a nice element that can be used either to play the game with, but even the components are so good at helping to tell stories.
Yes, there's lots of different ways you can play it. I need to put together a document at some point with the kind of the junior versions. But I know I've heard from a lot of teachers who use it in teaching English as a foreign language, and who also use it to help less assertive kids learn that it's okay to interrupt, because the game gives you permission to interrupt, and there's a card that basically says, you lot have to shut up, I'm telling the story. And for certain kids, that's amazing. That's, giving them permission to do that can really bring them out of their shell.
That's cool. And when you did that game, I guess you didn't envision that side of things, did you? That just came about naturally.
Not at all. It was, oh my god, we've got a couple of card game getting published. This is amazing. We were doing fanzines. And at the same time, I was breaking into the role-playing industry, writing books originally for Palladium, and then for other people, and then set up my own company in the 90s.
Talking of your past, I know that you told me about a pretty cool story, which is already out there.
Okay.
Like about who you played, who you potentially played.
Yes. Well, this has to do with where I was at school, which is a well-known institution near Windsor. I believe I played Dungeons and Dragons in probably about 1982-93 with David Cameron.
Yeah, our XPM.
XPM, yes. I think he only sat in for one session. But the guy who introduced me to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, as it was then, was a good friend of his, who I think is now his kind of half-brother-in-law by, I don't know. It's all a bit confused, but yes. So he was my first DM. And he was a good mate of Dave's, and then he got chucked out of the school for dealing drugs, and David almost got chucked out of school for taking drugs. And
do you know what? We didn't hear about that in his election campaign, did we?
Yeah, it's all out there. This is all public domain stuff. But yes,
that's pretty cool. I mean, like I've never played Dungeons and Dragons full stop, let alone with someone famous. I say famous, obviously, in the world of politics, but that's pretty cool, that story.
Well, he wasn't famous at the time. The thing is, I mean, that's basically all I remember about him. I don't.
He's a D&D fan.
Well, I don't think he was. He was only in for one session. Yeah. Otherwise, he was not. Everyone, Boris Johnson was 2 years above us, and everybody remembers Boris because he still had that kind of lazy charisma, even as a teenager. Yeah. And Jacob Rees-Mogg as well, who was lower down the school at the time, was even age 13 or 14 was a freak of nature, and and everyone knew him. But if someone had come to me as I left the school and said, one of the people you were at school with will be Prime Minister in however many years, who? I would not have put a single penny on David Cameron.
Yeah, that's funny, just the way his story played out. Maybe he had the becomes a prime minister ending story card.
Possibly, yes. Calls an ill-advised referendum.
Anyway, so the other stuff, because it's not just Once Upon a Time, right?
It's not. That's the big number. That's what I'm really known for. There's The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen, this is the 3rd edition out from Fantasy Flight these days. And
this is gorgeous.
They've done an amazing job with it. You probably can't see on the camera, but this is a spot varnish, so bits of that are glossy, and then it's full colour artwork. Hang on, I'll do this properly. Full colour artwork throughout.
Whoa.
Painted by, it's the same artist who does Once Upon a Time.
Who is that artist?
He's called Omar Rayam. He's Hungarian originally, but now lives in America. And I recommended him to Fantasy Flight. And he's been making me look good for the best part of 10 years. And I'm enormously grateful.
Omar.
He's fantastic. But yeah, so this is a much looser storytelling game in which basically you challenge each other to tell stories in the style of drunken noble people from the late 17th or early 18th century. Other way around. Late 18th, early 19th century. I always get that confused. So I would turn to you and I would say, my dear Baron, I've heard many tales of your exploits, but the one I've always wanted you to tell yourself is the time you accidentally got the Pope pregnant.
Hey!
And you just have to launch into telling that story, just making some shit up. And again, everyone's got a little pile of coins and you can interrupt. You push a coin forward and you might say, so I was in Vienna. In the spring of the 18 dash dash, and I'd push a coin across and go, but Baron, it's well known that Vienna closes for spring cleaning. And you can accept that interruption, take the coin, and go, oh, yeah, well, yes, I had crept in undercover as one of the cleaning crew. I was deputised with particular reference to the Danube. Or you can go, no, you fool, it is Paris that cleans, with a coin of your own. Paris closes for spring cleaning. Vienna is notably encrusted with 600 years of filth. And I can accept that, or double down on the... And things get very insulting, but one of us will eventually give way. And so you get interruptions that you can build into your story or not. Stories last about 5 minutes, and then you end up with a pile of coins in front of you, larger or smaller, and then you use those to vote on what you think is the best story.
Interestingly, you have doubled down on storytelling as your thing, right? I mean, how did that start? Have you always loved stories?
I love storytelling. I love storytelling games. I love the idea of a game with a story, not just a game that retells a story, but a game that allows you to create a story. Possibly it's coming at it from role-playing. I've worked in role-playing for a long time. I would primarily be a role-playing game designer if there was enough money in role-playing to make that worthwhile. Sadly, unless you're working for Dungeons & Dragons, there really isn't.
Do you think that something has changed, though? Dungeons and Dragons, because there are so many. I feel like there's always new RPGs being released, and that somebody must be making money off it, right?
Some are. I mean, if there are a number of companies which are profitable, and Kickstarter has changed an awful lot of things. If you've got a fan following, it's the Stuart Lee, the comedian, has a thing, and I'll probably get the numbers wrong on this, but he says that if you can get a following of 5,000 people who love your stuff enough to give you a tenner a year, you're making 50 grand a year, and that's a living.
Wow.
So if you can get a fan base or a constituency or people who know your name and know your reputation, then you can make money consistently off, for example, Kickstarter. I kickstarted, we haven't got to it yet, Las Vegas. This is my latest thing. This was kickstarted, it made 24,000.
Wow.
I only asked for 3. I just wanted money to cover...
It's because you're such a big deal, James.
Well, partly I did it partly to kind of take the temperature of my social worth on Kickstarter. It was meant to be a little project to teach me how to use crowdfunding websites. And then it kind of exploded, and then for various reasons it came out 5 years late. So I've kind of trashed my reputation for crowdfunding. But mind you, if you had backed this at the basic level for print, you would have got this book for £9, including shipping in the UK. So I think people have got value for money out of it. It's 322 pages.
How much does it cost now then? If it costs £9?
The paperback I think is 20 quid.
I see you are getting a good deal.
Well.
Yeah. And you know what? At least you got it out. Some Kickstarters out there, they've
still waiting. Still waiting.
Yeah.
Palladium Books have just had a nightmare with their Robotech miniatures game. All kinds of problems with that really from the get-go. It was delivered very late, and now they've had to announce that some of the promised expansions, I think, I may get the details wrong, but they're not coming out. Partly because of problems they've had earlier, further up the line, but also they've now lost the license to publish Robotech stuff, which was one of the early giant robot franchises.
That is really bad.
So it's a difficult one, and they're potentially in the hole for a lot of money, and I think various people are talking about lawsuits. And it's the trouble with Kickstarter is it looks like this fantastic frontier, and people give you money to try stuff out. But if you can't deliver it on time, a percentage of your audience, and it's only a small percentage who will be arseholes, but they will be arseholes about it. If it's a month later than you promised, they think Kickstarter is a shop.
Yeah, which it isn't.
It's not. It's a it's a funding platform. It's you're saying, go ahead, take my money to do this experimental thing. But if you want to make money on Kickstarter, you need to have the stuff basically finished, more or less ready to go.
I was kind of curious because, like, obviously myself and you don't know, but myself and Dave are currently investigating games design ourselves, and we're looking at doing Kickstarting, and it's kind of interesting that there's this. You almost have to know like a whole bunch of information about how to set up your Kickstarter so that it's ready and it will succeed. And I always found that really mind-boggling, because to me Kickstarter just felt like this kind of loose platform. I mean, now I know obviously a lot different, but I'm talking like a year or two ago, it just felt like something in that, I'll give this a go, just do a few sketches, kind of give you a bit of information and kind of show you, usually through like a video, this is kind of my plan, what do you think, guys? And then you just throw it out there. But now there's so much you need to do. You need to get your, as you said, get like your prototype done and have
the videos, like the level
ready.
of the videos, like the grand that's been spent on those alone, you're just like, just to catch the attention, isn't it, really?
So it's just difficult, and it's also difficult to stand out as well, because there's so many Kickstarters all the time. And I actually don't know how you feel about this, but I've noticed there's a lot more big companies using Kickstarter, which for me feels a bit, because if Kickstarter is like this investment platform where you're just you're saying, hey, have a go at this, I think you can expect more from a company. It shouldn't be like an investment, and they're more likely to successfully do the thing and actually give it to you at the end. But I always feel a bit like iffy about big companies.
It's a tricky one. I mean, I think, to be honest, big companies have been using Kickstarter from the beginning. It's just sometimes they've disguised it better. They've gone, here's these two guys, and we're not going to mention their 20 employees. But yes, it's a good point. Some companies have used Kickstarter to essentially create themselves. Reaper Miniatures, who were a mid-level miniatures company for a long time, did a massively successful Kickstarter about 5 years ago, where the stretch goal essentially was, if you backed, I think, at the $100 level, you got every single stretch goal. And what they were doing is they were converting the rubber molds that they had used to make metal miniatures into metal molds to make plastic miniatures. The metal molds, I mean, you're talking a 5-figure sum for that. It's about $10,000 to make one of those. But once you've got them, the price of making the plastic miniatures is like 2 cents for a sprue of minis. So it was really cheap for them to promise these things. It ended up, if you backed at the $100 level, you got something like $500 worth of, at retail value, $500 worth of really nice looking minis. And Reaper made, I think, 4.2 million on that. But overnight, or in a month, they went from being a mid-level minis company up to kind of the top tier.
And they're still going on, I guess.
They're still going on, they still do it.
Every few years, and they're gorgeous.
I know that other companies, like, I think, is it Renegade Games? I can't remember who it was that make the Tiny Epic.
Oh yeah, I think you mean.
I'm not sure. I feel bad not knowing that. But also, Minion Games. They do the Manhattan Project stuff, and they do all of their games, and they've made a name for themselves based on Kickstarter as well. So
absolutely, and Kickstarter does make it very, very easy. Once you've got that mailing list of people who backed your last project, you can just email them again and say, "We've got this new thing. If you liked our last thing, here's the new thing."
So it's kind of, it is appealing to sort of games designers, I guess. So we only briefly touched on Las Vegas, but like, how does that work? Like, sorry, you just started eating a biscuit.
I think I may have spotted a flaw in your format, in your podcast format.
What, with the delicious biscuits?
Delicious biscuits and tea. I'm going to spew crumbs all over the table now.
That's fine, I got it.
So it's a GM and players role-playing game. Old school, but it's designed to run in 4 sessions. And I should point out that Las Vegas is like that much of the book. The rest of it is extra stuff, stretch goals from the Kickstarter.
Wow.
So the idea is you wake up as the players in a shallow grave in the desert, naked and with no memories. Brilliant. So your character sheet is literally blank at the start of the game. Other players make up a nickname for you, and you can describe yourself physically. And other players get to say something that you've forgotten or haven't noticed, like a big tattoo on your back or some scars.
I'm already really
something like
intrigued
that.
by this.
So it's a very fast in. And you've then got 4 sessions to kind of work out where you are, what happened, what led up to you waking up in this grave. And it's all in this kind of bizarre casino city that looks like Las Vegas but clearly isn't Las Vegas, but is as big as Las Vegas. And there are shadowy forces, and you have to... stuff happens, let's put it that way. And there's a couple of kind of big left turns that I hope are completely unexpected. But it's structured like an HBO miniseries. It's structured like 4 episodes of TV, building up to proper cliffhangers at the end of each one, and big reveals, and character cameos, recurring characters and so on.
Wow, that's
And so many role-playing games are a bit like soap operas. They kind of they go on and on and on and on. Characters come in, characters go out, but nothing ever resolves, and the characters never really change. This, you know that after 4 sessions, your character is going away. That is the end of their story. So you can take risks with them, and they may well end up damaged. They can lose limbs, they can lose eyes, they can break legs and stuff like that.
You know what?
Love it.
We did a podcast very recently where I talked about my issue with Dungeons and Dragons as a concept and why I haven't really been dragged into it. Because it does seem to go on for so long and it doesn't have
drag on.
resolution.
Come on!
That's bizarrely, I've never heard anyone make that particular joke
I'm
before.
very
but
happy this has happened.
Definitely on purpose.
You'll notice we're not actually laughing, we're just congratulating you.
Yeah,
on
I'll
the
take
joke.
it. I'll take
Joke.
it.
And so this does appeal to me immediately more because I know there's a resolution and there's more of a structure to it. That's not to say that I didn't actually, or I won't ever try Dungeons and Dragons, but just that immediately is like, cool, I want to know what the end is, because that's kind of the appeal to me for most games, especially ones that involve stories. It's like, where's the end and what are we building to? And with Dungeons and Dragons, obviously, the end could be 2 sessions, it could be 100 sessions, it could be like, oh, I haven't thought of it yet.
It could never.
Just
I
frustrating.
have friends who are still playing the same game, the same campaign of. Actually, it's Empire of the Petal Throne. It's one of the very early 1970s role-playing games. They started this campaign when they were at university in the early 80s, and they are still playing it. And
phenomenal.
I'm impressed by their longevity.
Do you think they're ever close to the end at the moment?
I don't think
No?
there is an end. I think it just goes on and on. And they meet up once a month or twice a month, and they spend some time, with these characters who are all good, like good friends, and if that makes them happy, fine. But I like endings. I like story arcs. I mean, this is a lot of what I teach, and I wanted to do something, structured the way a good video game is structured these days. So it's interactive, so you can properly interact with the story and you can affect things in a big way. But it's building up to a big climax, and it's not just going to witter on for another 8 sessions.
Do you find then that because obviously there's quite a big surge, I feel there is anyway, I don't know how you feel the same, but there's a big surge towards D&D at the moment with 5th edition, lots more people are coming into the game. At the Board Game Cafe, we were talking about how they're running almost 2 a month now, welcome to D&D sessions, essentially, with staff there putting on games for customers. Are you finding then that people are diving into D&D and then sometimes finding other games in the roleplay world?
I think so, yes. It's much easier to find other games now. They've got a lot more visibility, and a lot of the podcasts that have, I think, contributed to the success of, or the renaissance of Dungeons & Dragons. 5th edition is a terrific set of rules, I have to say. And the starter set they've done for it is the best they've ever done since original Red Box.
I have a question for you based on something that came up during the thing. What do you think of 4th edition?
I'm in a tricky position because I know some of the designers.
Oh, okay. We can breeze
you love
past
it.
that if
It's
you
wonderful.
want.
I don't.
It's the best ones.
I don't love it. I thought 3rd edition was terrific. I think it was exactly the kick in the arm that Dungeons and Dragons needed at that point. I loathed 2nd edition. I thought it was awful. It didn't do any of the things it needed to do. It was simply.
I happen to know one of the guys who's. I'm joking.
But this is the trouble. It's not a big industry. So I know most of the guys who worked on 3rd. I know most of the guys who worked on 4th. I used to work with Mike Merles, who's now head of D&D. He wrote books for my old company. So, it's a small world. I think 4 was a misstep. I can see exactly why they went in that direction. But it didn't work. It wasn't what the market actually wanted. I could see how it could have worked. I can see why they thought it might have worked.
Anyway, so going back to what you were saying, you're talking about 5th edition was awesome.
5th edition, it's a great system of rules, and it's an easy in as well. And a lot of the podcasts, like Critical Role and Encounter RP and all the Geek and Sundry stuff, have been focusing on that, but do make it clear that other games exist. Will Wheaton's Tabletop, which is on a bit of a hiatus at the moment.
I think, actually, I'm not sure exactly what's happened, but it looks like it's been replaced with another series, and I don't know if that's long-term or if it's just temporary, but there's a new series called Game the Game, which seems to be like the interim version of Tabletop. Female presenter, same kind of setup, but less cutaways to stuff. It's just more focused on the game. So I don't know what's happening with that, but I'd be curious to know. Because I think everyone... I mean, I know a lot of people who got into some games from that, and I know that I think you were just probably about to say that they did like Dread. Dread, yeah, they did Dread, and then they've done a couple other RPGs
and they've done
on there as well.
some of the Green Ronin stuff. Chris, they got my friend Chris in to actually GM for them through several sessions of, I can't remember which game it actually was, but yeah, so there's a greater prominence there, and there's a greater awareness that there are games other than Dungeons and Dragons. And if you go into a bookshop now, there will be D&D, but there will be other games as well. So I think what we're going to see in the next few months or years is games that are designed specifically for podcasters. And in fact, the project I'm working on next, which is something I was working on 20 years ago and put aside because I couldn't work out how to package it, because it's a game, it's a book and a deck of cards. It's its own specialist deck. I mean, this uses a deck of cards as well. This uses tarot cards. You play blackjack with tarot cards. You use the imagery on the cards to drive the narrative, and the numbers numbers on the cards to decide how well you succeed or fail. It's a really slick little system. I'm really pleased with that. But the new one is, I finally got a good title for it. It used to be called Cop Show. Now it's called Get Down. It's the game of screen cops and funky beats.
Oh, man. Where's it set?
It's 70s. You are a cop in a cop show in the 70s or the 80s.
In a cop show?
In a cop show. You're a TV cop, you're not a real cop.
Oh my God.
So it plays in an hour. Because you're playing an episode of your show. And
perfect for podcasts, video podcasts.
Exactly. And it uses really simple card-based mechanics. Basically, you have a handful of cards. Each one has an action or a comment on it. And if you can play that in character, so it's I jump through a window, or I say, get your trousers on, you're nicked. Which was the original title for the series, but the Americans don't know what nicked means. I didn't know. They think it means have a small chunk taken out of you.
Which technically
or trousers for that matter.
Well, sort of.
Trousers, yeah, they'd be like, what are these objects?
Yes. What is this Sweeney to which you are quoting? So, yeah, and it's fast. You don't have to get hung up on the mechanics, but it's a bunch of people mucking around having a good time, and it's funny as well. And loads of attitude.
Sounds great. Can we do it? Can we do it on Chits and Giggles?
We're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I should have a playtest set. I'm showing it to the public again for the first time in 20 years next week.
How exciting.
Eclecticon in Reading.
Nice. Man, I love, and that's another thing. I know you go around the world as well. You attend conventions. You're teaching this games design masterclass around the world.
Yes,
now.
I haven't mentioned. When you ask me what I did, my mind always goes blank. I do a 3-hour game design masterclass to teach people how to design board games, taking them through the process of concepting and designing, and then testing and evaluating and giving and receiving feedback, rebuilding the game.
Have you ever felt like you've seen a game that you're like, oh, I'd love to do something with that, and you actively get involved, or do you always see it as that's theirs? Damn, as good as it is, like kind of.
I think it's theirs rather than mine. It's always tempting to kind of nick an idea, but I wouldn't.
I don't mean nick an idea steal for our American viewers. But if you saw like something that was really good and sort of you had an affinity for it, would you approach those guys and say, "Let me help you with this"? Like,
I think I would. I mean, on one level, it depends if I felt they could take it and run with it themselves. I would hate to see a really good idea that I felt might just languish, that they might not follow through on. So it hasn't happened yet. Though I was in Vienna earlier this week, running the workshop there, and there were some cracking games, some really interesting things. Because I usually give people a theme to give them something just to start crystallising their ideas around. And in London, it's usually London. We get games about coffee shops and games about commuting and games about sightseeing.
I do remember that one time that I was there, and so we had like 3 big groups of adults, and 4 big groups of adults, and you had 2 based on the tube, and as you said, 1 based on the coffee shop, etc. And then you had these 2 young kids.
It was my daughter and my 10-year-old and one of her friends, and theme of London. They come up with a game about being a Syrian refugee who's here with no papers and has to survive in London.
And they had
to win.
And then the special bit was that they put this characters through so much. I remember they were like, here's this card, you're fired, or you've just been fired from your job. I was like, those kids have a great future in games design. That makes sense, knowing they're related to you. So the Vienna thing, what
so I gave them the theme of Vienna, and there was one about travelling on the U-Bahn and you know, keeping your stress level down. But it was great because it was Viennese characters would wander over. You know, what happens when the drunk guy wanders over and sits down beside you? But someone went straight to, oh, we'll do the siege of Vienna. It's like, oh, London doesn't have a siege. Why don't we have a London? Oh,
you should widen it to Britain. You could get all the war games, the war themes in then, I'm sure.
I think so. It's a jumping off point for people. Oh, and someone did a really, really lovely one called Coffee and Cake, which was just about serving coffee and cake. And it wasn't you're running a coffee shop. It was just coffee and cake. Beautiful.
I do like
exquisite little game.
There's a couple of games like that exist now. One of them's called, I think, Elevenses, and it's putting on the nicest tea for your guests. And then there's like games just about donuts. It's like, I love how wide ranging all of the themes that games can cover is. It doesn't seem there's almost anything that's like off topic for games, and that's so cool. And especially with like creative things like this, it's good to see that, you know, you've still got some games coming up. I'm really excited to see this cop show one. And just to briefly touch on it as well, because I think it would be good for people who don't know that you actually have a history with
Tabletop Gaming Magazine. Yes, I have a column in this on the Spiel des Jahres, the winners, the games that have won the biggest games prize in the world since it started in 1978. So it's called All the Jahres. James Wallis plays the Spiel des Jahres winners, so you don't have to. Because some of them have aged very badly. Some of them just flat out suck these days, and so it's an excuse to be a bit rude about some of them. But you know, if they're good, they're good. And next issue I'm up to 1993, so it's Bluff, it's just Liar's Dice. It's Liar's Dice in a box that says Bluff on the cover. I know.
Was this post Liar's Dice existing?
Liar's Dice existed. I mean, Liar's Dice has been around. It won. It's got a couple of little tweaks in, and they're clever tweaks. But I can only assume that for some reason Liar's Dice hadn't penetrated to Germany.
Wow.
It's very odd.
Yeah,
and then we reinvent.
That's given me an idea.
But we're about to get up to Settlers of Catan, which was the one that changed absolutely everything. That was the moment it all.
I'm curious to see what you think of that one, actually, because that one will be interesting from a modern perspective,
viewpoint.
Looking back on it.
And I played it with some of my games design students at the university a couple of weeks ago, and they really got into it.
Yeah.
And these were people who don't know modern gaming. I think it's, as an entry drug, it's still perfectly pitched.
Yeah.
It's exactly right in terms of the complexity of the rules, the cognitive load it puts on you, how much you have to concentrate, what you have to concentrate on, and teaching you the whole idea of everyone stays until the end. You've got to cooperate with the other players in order to then beat them. You've got to trade. If you don't trade, you're not going to win.
Yeah.
It's a really good kind of tutor for this is how good modern games can be, and then they can go off and specialise.
It's almost like the defining game of board games, which is very lucky for designer Klaus
Teuber, yes. He was a dental technician. I mean, when
they come from everywhere, their backgrounds. Isn't
well, the interesting, when he did Settlers of Catan, he'd already won the Spiel des Jahres 3 times. He'd had 3 previous winners.
That's kind of interesting, because now I'm thinking of, for me in my head, I just thought, oh, this guy came up with this design, but I didn't know he not only has he designed games, but he won them as well. Wow, that makes sense then. Makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
We owe him a lot.
We do.
Yeah.
I wonder if there is, because I've only really played base game, I wonder if there is like a Catan expansion, maybe you guys know, that just lifts it a little bit for someone who has experienced gaming for a while.
I do think
you add in one of these and he's like, oh right, that's a whole new and more exciting game.
I think they do exist. I think Cities and Knights is probably the best one for doing that, but I think they're still releasing Catan stuff now, not base game expansions, but they're definitely releasing stuff for
Game of Thrones Catan, that's coming.
Yeah. Oh, I think
that's out. That was out at Christmas.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It is apparently basically just Catan. It's just with the kind of Game of Thrones.
But imagine all of them Game of Thrones fans will like Game of Thrones money.
That's it. To start with.
Well, that was great. I had a really informative. I was going to say informal, but I guess it was informal as well.
Yeah,
informative chat with you. And thanks so much for coming down. And we hope we are getting the chance to see this. This, what was the game called? Get Down.
Get Down.
I'm really excited about that. But yeah, that's it.
I'll take you a copy as well.
Yes.
Done.
Thank you so much, James. And,
My pleasure. Can I have another cup?
Yeah, of course. I'll go get one right now.
Brilliant.